We're going to start with branding, like I said. And this has been attributed to Jeff Bezos. I don't know if he actually said this, but the story is, your brand is what you say, what people say about you when you're not in the room. Now, I always say when you're starting off with a brand, if you're a new food founder, most likely you are the brand. You're the one going to the farmers markets, you're going to the trade shows, you're speaking in person, and extolling the virtues of your product and how amazing it is and how great it tastes. And people get sucked into that passion, right? You can draw them to your table because you have this really great vibe about you and they're excited to hear what you have to say. So they're going to try your product, and of course they're going to fall in love with it and buy it from you, right? Ideally, you grow from that stage, you expand, you go into retail, and all of a sudden you have sales reps that are taking your spot, or sales associates that are doing your food demos or trade shows for you. So now you no longer have that, necessarily that food founder passion behind the product, behind every sale that you're trying to make. So this is when your brand starts to become really important. It needs to tell the same story that you've been telling, but in a, somewhat 2D way, because it's not you there doing the talking. So this is when your branding, your visual identity, your brand toolkit becomes really important, because you want to stay consistent across all your channels. You want your team to all be doing the same things. And your packaging needs to tell a story as well, especially in grocery. So one example, going into the idea of the story behind your brand. Now, you could argue probably a generation ago, this didn't really matter as much. There was less competition. There was less, just a handful of brands representing each category. So people just sort of bought what they needed and went home. But the newer generations are much more savvy. They're looking on social media for information. And so they're looking to go beyond the brand. They know they have the choice of 25 different chocolate chip cookies if they're feeling the urge for a chocolate chip cookie. So, now it starts to become sort of beyond that. What about this chocolate chip cookie makes it more special than the next one? And one of those aspects is the story behind the brand. Think back to your brand, why you started it in the first place. Are you trying to bring a cultural product? Probably this is true for most of you, a cultural product from your homeland to a Western audience and introduce them to it. But it also might be something like a dietary reason. Maybe, you were looking for a gluten-free alternative to something that is wheat-based traditionally. It might even just be circumstances. Sometimes people have lost their job or their health was affected, and that caused them to, go into the food space and start creating something and finding a way to get fulfillment elsewhere. These are all really cool stories that people want to hear. So, whatever your story is, I encourage you to think back to what it might be and how you're going to share it with everybody else. This is, might not seem that important. You might think people don't want to care, but this is something that people are looking for and seeking out to find a connection, something that resonates with them. So in this example, I have two ethnic brands that do a great job telling their story. So on the left-hand side, it's like they believe they're two sisters that started this brand called Omsam, and they bring a lot of sort of marinades and sauces from East Asian dishes. And they want to bring it to the Western audience. And their story is that they hate the ethnic aisle in the grocery store. They don't think it should be there. They think that now, North America, we're so multicultural. People are exposed to a wide variety of foods when they dine out. Why can't their grocery experience be just as integrated? So they really set out to create a brand that could easily stand on its own outside of the ethnic aisle. Their story is really, really compelling, and they really wanted to rest heavily in the ethos of their culture, the colors, the brightness, and really kind of celebrate that. And so they've been like that from the beginning, and stayed very consistent in that sort of look. On the right-hand side is a line of Indian sauces and condiments made by a company called Brooklyn Deli. And in their case, the owner is a chef. And so, she had the opportunity. She was trained in a very traditional kind of cooking in North America, but was Indian in heritage. And so she really wanted to bring that to the masses, and she wanted to do it in a way that felt really easy, that people could easily integrate it into their own cooking. So she sort of had this story and this mission behind her to make things more accessible. And they've done a really great job sort of, kind of doing that education. So we'll look in these brands a little bit more detail in the next few slides. So when you're thinking about your story, just some things to think about. Try to create 1 to 2 sentences that just kind of describes your brand. In terms of the story, what is the guiding principle? What brought you here? What do you feel you want to, what change do you want to affect in the world? And it might sound maybe too lofty for a food brand, but these are the kinds of things that people are trying to identify with when they are, again, having the choice, the selection that they have in front of them as a consumer. They need to know that there's something that they can kind of grab onto and really relate to. Keep it real. Your story should be truthful. We, as human nature, we can sniff out a lie. So just make sure that you're being authentic in your messaging. Try to keep it simple, not too technical. I mean, unless you've decided to position your brand as being only for a home expert in a particular food technique or preparation, you really want to keep things really simple for the average user, especially if you're introducing, again, an ethnic brand into mainstream grocery. You're going to really have to meet people where they are. And so that leads us to number 4, relating to your consumer's lifestyle, rather than trying to convince them that they need to make a shift in their grocery list or their shopping habits or their dinner preparation. Is there a way you can take your product and just easily integrate it into what they're already doing? Obviously, that's a much easier sell. You're much more likely to get that kind of conversion that you're looking for. So really just try to keep that in mind when you're thinking about your story and your product. Another thing we're going to discuss is the brand personality of your brand. So in other words, if your brand was a person, how would you describe them? And this is really helpful exercise, because once you define, I would suggest no more than 3 to 4 traits, and it can be in this example of list that I have here for you, or it can be your own. It helps to shape everything about, whether it comes down for everything, whether it's the colors that you choose, the typography that you use, the messaging, your Instagram captions will all have this essence of a specific personality. And it's really nice to kind of stay in that space. People start to create a deeper connection with your brand when they kind of have this, personality around it. And this could be sometimes difficult for people. I know that we all want to be all things to all people. But if you've read anything about branding, in the past, it's that you can't do that. If you're trying to talk to everyone, you're talking to no one. We only hear the messages that we can relate to. If I'm hearing something that's designed to appeal to a 5-year-old boy as well as a 65-year-old grandma, it doesn't fall on my ears, right? But something that's talking to me as a mother, as a shopper, a grocery shopper, as someone who cooks from scratch, those are signals that are being put out to someone like me. I'm going to hear those. I'm going to pick those up. So really thinking about your tribe and, what are they going to care about and what is their personality? The personality that they relate to. So one way that kind of helps people when they kind of say, oh, but and I hear this from clients that I work with, oh, but my product is great for everyone. Again, not effective, not a good strategy when it comes to marketing. So one thing to think about is potentially who's your competitor and how do you sit against them? You can probably figure out, maybe not necessarily what you are for, but what you're against. So a great example in the past was the Windows versus Mac commercials. I don't know if you remember them, but those 2 guys on the left, Mac was putting up these commercials where they were not for the corporate stuffy spreadsheet guy on the left, right? Wearing the crumpled suit and looking a little disheveled. They were clearly for the cool, hip, younger artist, creator, innovator. And yes, definitely you could say that it was affecting their sales in that the people who did work in an office and did use spreadsheets might have said, oh, well, that's not for me then, obviously. But that's okay, because the people that they were saying who they were for became rabid fans and would fight, be loyal to their death. So really think about that. It's not, yes, you are turning away a certain segment by standing for something, but then the people that you stand for are going to get behind it 100% and will be with you forever. So, and then you're not really having to sell to them anymore. You just have to be true to who you are, who you say you are, and they'll just keep coming back. So this is something that Mac does very, very effectively. And I encourage you to think about how you can do that. How can you stand for something? How can you be someone that people really relate to? Another tool that agencies will use to create this brand personality is to adopt what's called a brand archetype. And in this case, there's sort of a standard, spectrum of types of archetypes that you could consider. And then once you choose this archetype for your brand, and it might naturally come just based on what the brand is and what it's all about. But if you select one, from that will come, again, all the messaging, all the photography, how that should look. Everything about your brand kind of will flow from this archetype idea. And again, we're trying to go beyond just being a product, beyond just being a hot sauce, or beyond just being a marinade or a spice blend. And we're trying to create this emotional connection. So we do that by speaking to our personality and our archetype in the brand. So I'll give you an example of one of these. Chipotle Mexican Grill. I mean, they're called Chipotle Mexican Grill. So you would think that all they wanted to do all day long was sell the idea of how great Mexican food tastes. But that's not at all what they do. If you look at their messaging, if you look at their website, if you look at their commercials and kind of the words that they're using, the phrases, they just talk about the freshness of their ingredients. And they do it in a pretty, again, we're talking about that lofty sort of broader ideal way. We believe food has the power to change the world. Well, certainly Chipotle Mexican Grill isn't going to be how we change the world, but they're talking about that's their aspiration, that's their vision for the company. And the way they do that is they use very basic, real ingredients that you can pronounce, that you can find in your kitchen. So in this case, their archetype is being a hero. I mean, by saying we're going to change the world, they're obviously adopting this sort of leadership role that's saying we're being brave, we're being a little bit arrogant, but we're quite determined to do things this way. And that carries through in their whole brand system. So, the tagline that would come with a brand, a sort of hero archetype would be, if there's a will, there's a way. Right. So we're going to just fight through what seemingly might be impossible to do, and we're going to find a solution. So this is an example of using an archetype in your brand messaging. I encourage you to, do your own research, take a look at their Instagram, look at their packaging around, how do they wrap their fast food, like all those kinds of things are all coming from this place. If you do your marketing correctly, you're always coming back to this same place and using the archetype as a way to build all of those elements. Now we're going to talk about the market. I've talked about it a little bit, but this is basically, the whole idea. Everything that you do should always come back to the consumer, and what the consumer is doing when they look at your product and they look at your commercial and they look at your Instagram ad and they look at your packaging in the store. What they're thinking is, what's in it for me, right? So how do we, again, meet them where they are? What are they looking for in a brand? It could be broad ideas, like they're just looking for more convenience in their cooking and their dinner preparation. It could be that they're looking for international experiences. They want to be able to say that they're worldly and that they like flavorful food. There is a part of us, we're all trying to, in some way, climb the social ladder, right? And might not admit it, we might not articulate it as a consumer, but if we can impress our friends at, our child's birthday celebration with some dish that tastes delicious that people haven't seen, that elevates our status in the eyes of our friends. And that is something that most of us are aspiring to some degree. And it might be something as simple as a dietary solution. So, if somebody's looking for something, again, gluten-free or low sodium or low sugar, because they've been told by the doctor that they have to, their health is affected by it, that's something that they're looking for. That's a solution that you might be able to meet them at. One way to think about your customers, again, another tool is just to think about other brands that they buy. Where do they go on vacation? Where do they, what shoes do they buy? What do they like to do when they travel? Do they like sports? These are things that will, again, get you in mind if you can sort of almost put together a picture, and we're going to talk about that in a bit, a picture of who this person is. You'll be able to get a sense for what kinds of, how other brands relate to them, how they find connection with those brands. So you're able to kind of look at those brands, see what they're doing right, seeing what, might work for you. And that's so that, again, that's one tool that I would encourage you to think about. And then also, just thinking again, at the end of the day, what benefit can they derive from using your product? Why are they going to choose you? And what this comes down to is, the idea of features versus benefits. And definitely when I talk to most business owners, who don't have a marketing team, when I ask them what's great about your brand, they'll start to list their features. An example would be a gym, just for an example, a health gym. If I were to say, what's great about coming to your gym? People are going to say, well, we have 24 elliptical trainers. We're open 24/7. We have classes 5 days a week. These are features. These are things that they offer as a service. But as a customer, that might be important to me. Eventually, it'll be important to me. But what I'm first thinking about is, why should I go to the gym in the first place? What benefit am I going to get? So if you can instead, when you're trying to, market your gym, if you can instead talk about the fact that, you can play with your grandchildren and not get winded so much, or climb a flight of stairs, or you're able to take that vacation in Greece and walk on the mountains. Those are benefits to going to the gym. So I encourage you to just think about your brand, the product that you offer. We all know the features. We know that it's low sodium. We know that it's healthy. We know that it has an ingredient that tastes great. Those are features. But because as a result of those features, what benefit is the consumer deriving? So really, spend some time in that space, really thinking about the benefits that you offer, and speak to those more, because again, that's a message that consumers tend to hear more. So now going into this idea of an ideal consumer profile. And this is essentially, a template that you would use, you would take it home with you, and you would fill this out, just thinking about the person that your product would be absolutely perfect for. So you start to build this, and you kind of break out these different areas that makes up their personality. And this sorts of give you a sense of like, how do I meet these people where they are? And so just kind of doing this exercise, you can do it with more than one customer profile, because there might be more than one customer that you're targeting, but they will each be unique in their own way in all these areas. So you're going to want to fill one out for each of them. And again, maybe create separate campaigns to address those people. So this blank template doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I like to move right into the example. So if you were putting this template together or filling out this worksheet for yourself, you would actually start to really think about the person that you're marketing to, that consumer in the grocery store. What are they looking for? So in this case, as an example, you might be looking at home cooks who also work out of the home. So they're really busy. They're strapped for time when it comes to dinner preparation. They do love traveling when they do have free time. So they're a bit adventurous in the kitchen, because they've had exposure to other types of flavors and international cuisines. Their goals, again, might not articulate their goals out loud, but they definitely want to impress their friends when they come over with really great tasting meals. And they like to be in the know with their city and the world, and just kind of be in touch with, the latest flavors and the latest things kind of going on, not just in food necessarily, but just in trends in general. So someone who's kind of on the edge of things. So again, this might not relate to your product. This is me giving an example of a customer profile for a specific product. So you might describe them differently, certainly. The person like this might be frustrated by spending too much time in the kitchen. They might be frustrated by meals that are kind of bland or flavorless. So why they'll choose you is because they're busy. So they're looking for something really easy to use and convenient. But they're also looking for something with lots of flavor. So this is the case that you could build this picture of a person based on these parameters, and you can start to see, okay, now I know how I need to meet this customer, because what magazines are they reading? Are they spending time on TikTok or not? Do they go to Pinterest for recipes? These are the kinds of things that you can start to think about and see if it matters and relates to your brand, and if you need to meet those people where they are, right? So that's can be really helpful. Thinking about the competition. So this is another space where you really need to consider and really spend some time in. I encourage you to actually go to the grocery store once a quarter, twice a year, once a year, depending on your product and how quickly trends change. And just go and scope out, see what's going on in your category. It really helps to kind of stay on top of things. Offerings change all the time. Consumer habits are changing all the time, and companies are trying to meet them at those new habits. So it's really worth figuring out, kind of doing a snapshot of what the competition already looks like. A tool that you will use, and you can Google this term, is the SWOT analysis, and it stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so what you're doing in this case is you're putting a worksheet together that lists your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for your company. And then you're going to do the same thing with maybe 3 to 5 of your competitors. And when you start to do this, you start to uncover potential holes in their marketing or what the product that they're addressing and the way they've created it. You might be able to see, oh, there's a space here. Here's a space that nobody's occupying. How do we fill that space, right? And especially if you're at the point where you're still developing your recipe or changing your product or looking at packaging formats, doing this kind of thing can help you find a space that nobody's occupying yet, right? Maybe having a novel packaging is worth doing in your case because it will help you to stand out. But maybe if you hadn't seen what the competition was doing, you wouldn't know how to stand out that way. So this comes down to another marketing term, your USP, which stands for unique selling proposition. And this is something, I would ask you if you came to me as a client, if you say, I've got this new barbecue sauce that I want to introduce. And I'm going to say, how are you going to stand out? Why would your barbecue sauce be any different than anyone that's already in existence? Because there's plenty of them out there, and so you can still be successful, but you've really got to identify what it is that makes you special and make sure you lean into that. So be prepared to answer that question and really think about what's unique. And saying that it tastes great isn't unique. Saying that you have a specific ingredient could be unique, but then you have a different problem where you have to educate the consumer about this brand new ingredient that maybe people aren't necessarily familiar with. So that leads to its own unique set of issues. But just really kind of thinking about what your USP is and what that could mean. So now all these things that we've talked about our target market, we've talked about our competition, we've talked about our brand personality, can all be put together and incorporated into what's called our positioning statement. So positioning is basically where you are in the marketplace as a product, as a service. So it's really great to have this document filled out. And again, you might put this together and then iterate it a few times, put a few drafts together, get better, get more refined, get more focused on your thinking each time you do it. And then you kind of stick it in your office drawer and refer to it every once in a while. So anytime you're putting an advertising campaign together, anytime you're looking at potentially redesigning the packaging of your product, anytime you're hiring, someone to help you on your team, always this really kind of helps you to go back and think about, the choices that you're making, what trade show you should go to, is it worth spending the money on X, Y, Z trade show? The position statement will really help you determine whether it's worth doing that. So, a little bit of work up front, and then this should save you time and money in the future, because you can always refer back to this and say, well, am I addressing this group of people in the way that I want to? No? Okay, then this opportunity can sort of fall by the wayside. However, if it matches your positioning statement, then this might be a great time to sort of jump all in, right? So again, this doesn't really make sense. I find when it's blank, it's probably better to see an example, but you can see, what we're doing. We're kind of putting all those thoughts together into a couple of sentences. So to our target market in need, the brand name of our product is the brand of, and the competitive framework being, the space that you're occupying, which category you're in, that delivers what benefit. So again, features versus benefits. But yeah, the reason why is where we talk about our features. And then the brand character or personality is. So again, how we describe ourselves, our brand as a human, if they were human. So here's an example. Goya Foods is a brand of Latino food products that are very popular in the US. So, they've become very mainstream. They've become, kind of gone beyond the Latino market for people who are looking to recreate Latino dishes, but aren't necessarily of that heritage. But they are people who are looking to cook from scratch, right? They do have some time-saving kind of products, but they also have a lot of just the basics that you need, a lot of staples that you need in that cooking. So to families who cook from scratch, so, I'm saying families, So we know that we're addressing both kids and parents. Goya Foods, that's the brand name, is the brand name of Latino Foods. So again, this is the competitive framework of, they're up against any other brand that's offering products that go with a Latin-based food cuisine. And they deliver high quality nutritious versions of Latino food. So basically people's benefit is that they're getting higher degree of nutrition and higher quality out of their products. The reason why and the way that they do this is they do offer low sodium, low sugar, and organic versions of products that you would otherwise find that are not those things. So, they're able to offer this more nutritious benefit to the consumer. A couple of brand character personalities is, when you look at their product, again, you look at the branding, it's really well branded. It's very clear who they are. They're using very kind of neutral, corporate kind of looking colors. So they're being very approachable and dependable. They feel like they've been around forever with their choice of everything being very simple and easy to read. And exotic though, there is just a tiny bit of flair there, nothing too over the top. But you definitely get the sense that this is not a Canadian food, for instance.